The Van Ryneveld Pass Dam, or the Nkweba Dam behind me, was one of the early big five dams built in South Africa. The other four was Lake Mentz on the Sundays River, as this dam is, near Janssenville. There was the Kamanassi Dam near Oudtshoorn. There was a Hartbeespoort Dam near Pretoria up in the north, and the Vaal Barrage near Vereniging on the Vaal River. These dams were all complete, just complete by 1925. This particular dam was opened on the 16th of July 1925, and the other dams were at the same time. I think the earliest one, the Kamanassi, was opened in 1922, the Vaal Barrage in 1923, Hartbeespoort Dam 1925, and so forth. It's the same era. But why are these dams important? We should recognize that there were no real big dams built in South Africa at all before 1910. The idea of building bigger dams for irrigation was a new idea that only started to really solidify after unification in 1910. After 1910, in 1912, they established the concept of irrigation boards, which was the mechanism by which these dams would be built. And then World War I happened. It slowed down everything. On the other hand, there was the big ostrich feather crash in 1914, which brought a lot of farmers back from ostrich farming to irrigation farming, and there was more pressure for dams. There was the big flu in 1918. There was economic misery. Everything slowed down. So the only real building started just after the First World War. These early dams, we must also recognize, we didn't have much as engineers. There was almost no experience on building dams of this magnitude. There were no design codes, there no standard procedures. Also recognize that this was the era when there was a transition from animal power and human labor to more mechanized tools and equipment. And all of these things had to be taken into account by the resident engineers and the engineers on site. A lot of these things had to be improvised. In this particular case, the Van Ryneveld Pass dams had a few firsts, most notably the little knobs that you see on the down face of the dam. Today we would call that something akin to a Roberts splitter. That was the first time in South Africa that such an energy braking device was incorporated into practical design. Anyway, so this historical significance of this dam is not only because it was old, 100 years old, and that it still serves its purpose admirably well, but also that it was a pioneering dam along with the four other cousins it had. Let me quickly recognize also that there were other dams. The Calitzdorp Dam, for example, is the oldest dam with this type of construction in South Africa. That was completed in 1918, but it was much smaller than this one. It was about 15% or so, 10% of the capacity of this dam. There was also in our area, there was the Lake Arthur Dam near Cradock, also of this type, which was also completed in 1925. But the Tarka Dam also was only about 1/10, 1/5 roughly the capacity of this one. So it would be appropriate for us, as we now talk in more detail further on about Nkweba Dam, to recognize that it was in its own way one of the pioneering engineering constructions in terms of large dams in South Africa. Not only in South Africa, but also all over the world. This was the first golden era of dam building had just commenced then. So all the engineers all over the world were sort of grappling with the logistical and the structural and the design issues that are raised by dams of this magnitude. The dam used to be called the Van Ryneveld Pass Dam. It's a long name, but it describes it well. There used to be, before the building of the dam, a road running from Gaffernet to Maritzburg. We're standing very close to it at the moment, but it was built roughly at river level, slightly above the river level. So when you build the dam, of course, it's needed that you lift the road up to pass around the dam. Otherwise, the top part of the first part of the road will be inundated by the dam water. And this is what you see behind me. Part of the dam construction was to also reroute the old Van Ryneveld Pass. And the road behind me, winding along the edge of the dam, is the version 2 of the Van Ryneveld Pass. This view shows the third version of the Van Reynevelds Pass. To the left, you can see Barber's-Gat, the one we just talked about, the little section of the dam that pushes up in the kloof to the left. And the road, somewhere in the 1950s, I believe, was actually realigned and improved somewhat. And this is what you see in the center of the picture now. That's the new road, the modern road that you will drive if you go from Maritzburg to Graaff-Reinet today, which takes you over the dam. And there's a little bit of a visual disconnect between Barber's-Gat on the left and the dam, but there is actually a big culvert below the road you're looking at, which hydraulically connects the two. So as the water rises in the one side, it also does in the other end. Interesting, nothing to do with the dam, but just a local story, is this old road which made this very sharp turn around Barber's-Gat and then a sharp turn back onto the sort of the main route. That used to be called the Hondse Been, the dog's leg, by the older people. And I'm told that this was where we're looking at now, was actually the site of many an accident, where people would come from Maritzburg at speed, and they wouldn't know possibly about it, where the car is actually going right now, and would just happily continue and crash into the dam. And the same happens if you come up from Graaff-Reinet. You're at an incline, you come around the corner, and the next thing you have nothing in front of you. And that also people crashed in from both sides. So this apparently was also one of the leading reasons why they changed it. The Nkweba Dam, or Van Reynevelds Pass Dam behind me, shows almost the full extent of the dam. Although we cannot see the rivers, I can describe to you briefly who the four contributors are. Immediately behind me is Gouvermentskop, the prominent koppie behind me. The first prominent river is the Sundays River. The Sundays River starts up at Loodsburg and in Naardenburg, in other words, north and northeast of Graaff-Reinet. That's a major contributor. The second major contributor is the Gats River. The Gats River, some of you may know as the river that runs through New Bethesda, comes from the sort of the northeast. The confluence of the Gats and the Sundays River are literally a few hundred yards before they hit Van Reynevelds Pass Dam. So just to the right of Gouvermentskop, if you could see it, there's the confluence of the Gats and the Sundays, and they then enter the dam as a single river. The two minor contributors are the Pienaars River, the Pienaars River coming from the west, and the Broederstroom, a smaller river coming from the east. If you look at average inflows, the two major rivers contribute 80 to 85% of the total inflow, whereas the two minor rivers contribute the balance. On the face of it, a dam is not a very complicated thing to build. It's just a long wall essentially, but it is a very large structure and it requires a lot of time. The time it took from the middle of 1920 to 1925 to actually start and complete the dam, 5 years, and it consumes a huge amount of materials. So logistics come into play. So to build a dam, you need significant preparation to get the people, the materials, the equipment, everything on site to be ready to actually start the construction. Where I'm standing now, I'm actually in the middle of, we'll call it the construction village for the purpose of this video. This is where just about everything happened relating to the management of the construction. Behind me, you'll see a row of sort of low stone structures. We're not exactly sure what was what, but we do know that there were 800 people at a time at the height of construction on site, and probably most of them living on site. So how do you accommodate 800 people? Think about it. You need kitchens, you need storage of food, you need ablution, water, you need power, you need all of that, and all of that was actually built. The construction team built a water treatment plant, a small one with a big water tank, which they filled from the Sundays River, treated the water and kept it on site. They actually built a small power station. They needed that because they also had power equipment on site. The pneumatic drills, for example, that were absolutely necessary to break the rock in the quarry just behind me there, which is also somewhere in the video. All of that required power, so they had their own power station. Three houses were built specifically for the three engineers employed here. We can't see that on the image now, but I'm pointing towards it now. The biggest house, the furthest one, was the house of Mr. K.R. Shand. He was the chief engineer. He also became quite an important guy. Later on in his career, he actually ended up as the then Secretary of Irrigation in the 1940s. In today's language, it would be the Director General of Water Affairs, roughly the equivalent thereof. So a significantly successful and an eminent engineer, at that time a younger person, of course, to take charge. And he had two assistant engineers. The one took care of the canal system south of Graaff-Reinet towards Kendru, and the other one was employed with the dam building itself. So there was also an interesting piece of infrastructure. To my right there, about 400 yards or so away, runs the railway line between Graaff-Reinet and Middelburg. Now, part of building a dam is to get materials on site, and they use large amounts of cement. Cement is not a local product. It was imported from overseas at the time. It was shipped to Port Elizabeth. From there it was put on a train. It came all the way up to Graaff-Reinet, and they actually built a temporary siding, just as I point now, literally 300, 400 meters away, a little branch line from there through where I'm standing right now to roughly the end of the dam wall, which you can see on the picture. At the end of the dam wall there was the concrete batching plant, and that was where the cement actually was used to make the concrete. So the cement would be shipped up by train, it would be shunted off onto the sideline, and the train wagon would be used, all the cement, and I take it at periods every month, a week or whatever, a new shipment would arrive. So this specific little line was only built for the dam and for the use of the dam. So right here, you're looking at the heart of the construction village, where a lot of things happened during the 5 years that the dam was built. This viewpoint draws our attention to two things. First of all, we're standing right on the edge here of the rock quarry, where they used to open up and quarry out the rock, break the rock into large chunks, and from there move it onwards towards the dam. What is not obvious if you view this quarry from the other side where the road and the cars are, is it looks rather insignificantly small, but it's not. If you, where I am now, and as you can see on the still photos, this is one tremendous, huge, groot gat in die grond, which is actually quite frightening to have this so close to where people live. But anyway, that's the rock quarry. The other point of viewpoint we can see is from the base on the riverside, on the other side of the river, from where you can start seeing the river bed, up to the dam wall. In that area was where Andrew Geddes Bain built the first Verduynenveldspas. We're not exactly sure where it was, because that area has obviously been disturbed by all sorts of excavations during the building of the dam, the relocation of the road, footpaths, and so forth. We will probably conduct sometime a closer check to see if there are bits and pieces left of the remaining retaining wall to exactly place it better. But the main point for this video is that it was somewhere there on the other side of the river, up to the dam, lower than the dam, the top of the dam, was the original route of Andrew Geddes Bain's first pas, or the second pas that he ever built in South Africa. The three main ingredients to build a dam are cement, water, stone, and sand. The water is obvious, that's in the Sundays River. The cement came in with a special siding, as you'll see elsewhere in the video, but the bulk of the material will be sand and rock, or aggregate, as we call it, the engineers will call it. Where did they get that? The sand they all harvested from the bottom of the dam, from the dam wall, from a distance below, all the way back up where the excavation for the wall was, and a considerable way upstream. Actually, the more sand you use, the bigger the open volume of the dam. And they used two methods to cart the sand towards the concrete mixing plant. The first was mules. They used a spanner mule. I'm not calling it the span of mules. A few spans of mules and wagons. And they also had a little train here, a little steam locomotive, and that has quite an interesting history. The train was used before this for building Lake Mens. It was imported into South Africa. It was used in Lake Mens. It did its duty there. It was then transferred to this site. It worked here for the duration of the contract, and as far as we know, it was actually scrapped after the event. So it was really opgewerk, as they would say, on this dam and on Lake Mens. The rock or the aggregate has another story, which is also quite interesting. If you look towards the horizon that side, you can see on the other side of the riverbank, you'll see the hole left where they put up a rock quarry. Now the dolerites there had to be broken. It's quite a tough rock to break. And for that they used, as far as we can figure out, steam and with jackhammers. So what they did, they pried loose fairly large boulders there. But they couldn't use that for cement. You have to crush it into a size of 1 or 2 or 3 inches in diameter, or 20, 30 millimeters. And for that, it was a second step. So the first step was, if you could follow it, there was the quarry. From the quarry, they had a little trolley line, and you can actually see the line of the trolley line running from the quarry towards the dam at a slight angle. And then a little bit further, you will see a step in that line. The line runs towards my left, and then there's a step, and then it continues at a distance about 4 meters or so lower. Now, at the point of the step change, that's where they had a crusher plant. It was a tall structure there, and what they did from the trolleys would run down by gravity onto the crusher. They would tip the wagons, and the big boulders or and the rock fragments or whatever was in the trolley as it came out of the quarry was dropped into a chute, and that went into 2 big jaws, the so-called jaws crusher, crunched it down to an appropriate size, and the broken even material came out the bottom of this thing. There was a second trolley waiting, and as the trolley then filled, it was released, and it was actually running down further towards the left, almost up to the dam wall. And at the dam wall, there was the concrete batching plant. So from the one side, it received cement coming from the trains. From the other side, it got the sand. There was a conveyor belt from the base of the river taking the sand upwards towards the batching plant. And of course, the rock was then taken from the rock trolley as it came from the crusher plant. Quite an involved system, but because the volumes are so large, you simply had to have this sort of mechanized system to speed up the production of concrete, because that's in the end what was the main bottleneck, why the dam could not be completed quicker than it was. The second thing I want to point out are the desludging valves. If you look at the base of the dam wall on the far end, there's a chamber there. And the idea was at the time to have 3 big valves there. And then occasionally to open those valves, and by opening it, the hope was that it would suck out a lot of the bottom sludge, and in that way sort of reduce the rate at which the dam would fill up with silt. Now remember, we said at the beginning that these were the early days of big dam building all over the world. We didn't really have proper theories or experience or data points or common codes of practice on how to desludge a dam, for example. So that was a theory at the time, that if you would open up a strong enough current at the bottom, it would suck out the sediment. But unfortunately, it didn't work, not only here, but all over the world where they tried that. Because when you open those valves, it does suck out a lot of the bottom sludge. But it's limited only to a very short or very small area immediately above the valves themselves. It wouldn't affect anything happening a few hundred meters upstream. So they really didn't work. So they came into disuse, but those were the desludging valves. And that's where they are, and today you can't even see them from the other side. It's all overgrown. They're not in operation, but I just wish to point them out. The third thing I want to point out from here is the area below the dam. Now largely overgrown, you cannot really see what's going on anymore, but there was a nice little flat spot, so to speak. And that was where the opening ceremony was held. On the 16th of July 1925, there was a big speeches and eminent people and all sorts of people were around to officially declare the dam open. And on the still photo, you can see all the preparations that were made. There was a center stage built for all the dignitaries to sit on. There were 2 huge flagpoles erected with Union Jacks at the top. There was a whole sort of a ring of like picnic type benches where the general public could sit and listen to all the speeches. Apparently the high point of the ceremony was a rather dramatic sort of demonstration. And that's when they opened the 3 desludging valves at the far end of the dam wall to get a nice upward spray of water to sort of seal the moment. At that moment, that still photo was taken, and you can see that most of the public and the dignitaries have all shifted their attention to that point. Many people walked right up to the point where the water was going up, and the dignitaries left their seats and they stood to look and see a bit better what was going on. So this was the spot, this area, where the function was held in 1916. 1925, I'm sorry, my mistake. Another point of oblique interest, in the same year, 1925, the Prince of Wales visited South Africa. And he was taken as part of his little tour of the town. He was taken up the valley and places like that. But he was specifically also brought to this point, maybe not this exact point, but a vantage point here where he could look down on the dam, where the town actually had a reason and a pride to show them their wonderful new dam that was built. That's the story of the Gaffernet Dam up to 1925 when it was inaugurated. By way of a brief reflection, so what happened in the last 100 years? Remember when the dam was built, it was almost exclusively for irrigation further down at Kendru, and the municipality at that time had a very small allowance because the town was very small. In the 100 years, it has completely switched around. There's no more irrigation water released from the dam. And the municipality has now full use of the dam, and even that is not adequate. The dam, or this town, requires quite a bit more water, especially in times of drought, and therefore there's a whole new borehole scheme. The downstream irrigation system to Kendru is also important just to note that it was a significant part of the dam project. We all see and talk about the dam as if it was only the dam. There was more to it. Kendru is about 50 to 60 kilometers south of here. So there were extensive civil engineering works, canals, weirs, 2 or 3 larger weirs, and distribution structures, flow measurement structures. All of that was built. In total, it comprised about 25% of the total budget for the project. The South African Institution of Civil Engineering is a professional body with more than 10,000 members who are all civil engineering professionals. They join us this year in celebrating and commemorating the 100-year anniversary of the completion of the Nkweba Dam. Their way of recognition is by awarding what they call Civil Engineering Heritage Awards or plaques or medals or whatever you want to call it. This year, the Nkweba Dam was selected to be the Civil Engineering Heritage item, so to speak, number, on a provincial level. And for that, they've awarded the dam proper status as a heritage symbol. And it's commemorated here on this board with that blue sticker. In the still that we'll show in the video, you can read the wording exactly, but it only says it recognizes this as a civil engineering heritage structure. And so we're very pleased and gratified that the institution actually honored our town and our dam in this way as well. We end this video by pointing out a small but important feature of the Gaffernet Dam. During construction, a walkway was added on top of the dam, in other words, above the overflow, which enabled a person to walk from the one end of the one riverbank to the other riverbank across the dam wall itself. Now that provided the opportunity for the inhabitants of Gaffernet to walk up Cradock Street At the swimming pool, roughly, you would pick up the Willow Walk, which is a walkway, a popular walkway alongside the old pipe coming from Mackiespitz, which would take you up to the dam wall, and then you could then cross the dam wall and come back towards town working on the old Van Reineveld's Pass, which we already pointed out earlier in the video. So that provided a great relief for the people of Graaff-Reinet after a hot summer's day towards the cooler evening, to take a gentle stroll and see the dam. In that way, the dam also became an intimate part of almost the social life of Graaff-Reinet. Not to speak about the romantic walks, the many romantic walks that we had there, the young people in town, and of course all the college students in town often use that. It was also a great place for a photo shoot. Many of the older photos were taken with a dam somewhere in the background. The lights on the dam were put up when the dam was built in 1925. About 40 years later, the lights were taken down. We're not exactly sure about the date or the reason, but the municipality took it down. And another 60 years later, about 2 or 3 years ago, one of the lights actually found its way back to Graaff-Reinet Museum by way of a donation from one of the families who had bought some of the lights many, many years ago when they were taken down. The museum took it upon themselves to restore the top of the light. That was the part that was donated. This little section in between, a special post was made as close as possible to we could figure out from the old photographs. The pedestal was built. So now we have an artifact here in the garden of the Graaff-Reinet Museum, and it's quite important. As important commemorations and celebrations and verjaarsdae are going. Those are important, but they come and go. But this artifact here will remain here to keep reminding us, our visitors as well as the inhabitants of Graaff-Reinet, of the very close relationship and the great role that the Graaff-Reinet Dam played in the life of the history of Graaff-Reinet. But Graaff-Reinet Dam is, I think, unusual in some respects for two reasons. The first is the dam is very close to town. It's very easy for people in town to walk up to the dam. It's literally 10 minutes walk or 5 minutes by bike. And we forever see people walking and jogging and biking up to the dam or just to have a good time on the edge of the dam and just sit there. That in a way almost offers a private public ownership, if I could use such a word. There's a very close association with the people of Graaff-Reinet and the dam itself, which is good for engineering, because most of our infrastructural projects are largely buried or stuck away somewhere where nobody can see them or find them. In this case, not so. I will demonstrate that with a little anecdote which was told to me a few years ago. It was a custom in those days that the fancier ladies of the town would make an annual trip at the right time to go and buy their clothing or to sort of fill out their clothing cabinet for the new season and for the new fashions. So two of these ladies set out one year with a big, probably a Chev or a Ford CAZ car rambling off to Cape Town. A little bit nervy about that because, you know, people in Graaff-Reinet drive the way that people in Graaff-Reinet drive. You know, there's nothing fancy about it. So they're heading up into Cape Town with all its traffic cops and heavy traffic and trucks and people. And so they were quite a bit scared about the traffic part of it. And by gum, as they entered Cape Town, suddenly out of the blue, a young speed cop, complete with uniform, jumped out from behind a car or a pillar or a bush or whatever he was sitting behind. And he frantically waved them down. And the two ladies thought, oh boy, this is it. This is exactly what we feared. So as they stopped and they rolled down the window, the little speed cop youngster came up to the car very quickly and he stuck his head into the window and he said, "Hoe vol is die dam?" And that just shows that this poor kid from Graaff-Reinet sitting there in Cape Town, longing for his girlfriend and his mother or whatever, the first thing he thought of when he saw the Graaff-Reinet car was, "Hoe vol is die dam?" And in a way, that's still the way we speak and talk. The first thing that we ask each other, het dit gereën en hoe vol is die dam?